What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 333. Is that right?
Yeah. Lucky 333.
My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me, I actually finally get to say not on the line, but sitting directly, in fact, touching my shoulder right now. It's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, how goes, sir?
It's actually going great.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why. It's because we're recording this on Wednesday night. Mm-hmm. And the Pro Tour's in 2 days, and I already have a deck. And that might seem like not a lot of time, but I usually haven't decided until Thursday. I'm not saying I pick up a new deck, but usually you just make the ultimate decision between the last two or three on the day before and figure it out. I've actually been locked for well over 6 hours by now, so I'm in a surprisingly good mood, and I really like the draft format. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so this show is the Pro Tour Testing Insider Show. I mean, you know, when you first came on the show, Luis, I didn't know if we could make this type of thing work because there is some information sensitivity that comes from right in front of a Pro Tour. But I was like, well, I wonder if he'd go for it, and you did. You said, "All right, put your phone down."
I didn't actually want to look at my phone, but I just couldn't help it. Marshall's talking
This is going to be. Why did I agree to do a show with you in the room?
The live show is just the best.
You're bad enough when you're 2,000 miles away.
Long story short, I didn't like skipping the week of the Pro Tour because I thought that was actually the best week to talk about the show. So our compromise is we'll record it and then just put it up on Friday of the Pro Tour.
Yeah,
I think that's awesome. I know that as someone who used to read Magic content before I even made it, getting the sort of like the closest to the actual event date, getting that information is always just the most interesting.
Yeah, and it's just great because you being a full professional Magic player gets us that insight into one of the top testing.
I'm fully
teams.
Professional in all things.
Well, I didn't sound right when I said it. Before we get into everything, though, of course, I want to remind you about our sponsor, Channelfireball.com. They are and have been the sponsor of the show for a long time, and with good reason. They take care of us. And they'll take care of you as well. If you go to Channel Fireball, you're going to find everything you need that's Magic related. It can be sealed product, it can be singles for whatever deck you're brewing up, and or you can get some apparel. There's limited resources, T-shirts there for sale if you're interested in that kind of thing. And there's content, free content, and it's awesome. You can watch videos, read articles, and even podcasts like this one by some of the best players in the world, all with the goal of getting you to improve at Magic. And we've actually had a pretty cool recent edition that you may have seen before, and we finally got it kind of in the right channels now.
Right. This is our new killer app, as it were. This was an idea spearheaded by Andrew Parnell, one of the listeners of the show, awesome dude, Parney. And his idea was a clickable set review page. So you can actually go to Channel Fireball and you see it, and we'll have the link in the show notes. You'll see every card from Shadows over Innistrad just on the page, like a visual spoiler. But if you click on the card, you end up hearing what we have to say about the card. And it also, it makes it so it's easy to find a specific card. It makes it just more visual. The whole thing is just an incredible idea. And, thanks to Andrew's help, we were able to kind of get that together and get that set up. So
yeah,
I was pretty excited about it.
It's really cool. It's like, I think it's really good for reference, right? Because I think that most people want to listen to all the cards leading up to the pre-release so that they can get an idea for the big picture stuff. But afterwards, you might get stumped on a card, or maybe there's just the one card, and it can be really difficult to sift through a 4 or 5 hour show, or even an hour. Who wants to scrub through to find that one card? And here, you just click on the card on the interface, and you can, by the way, do this on your phone or mobile or on the website, and it'll just play it. And we've got a big response from it because people just think it's so sweet. So anyway, Channel Fireball is where you can find that as well. And once again, thanks to Parnell and thanks to CFP for making that work, because they work together to make that happen. Also, if you want to support the show directly, you can do so via the Patreon. That's patreon.com/limited resources. It's easy to set up. You get a custom thank you card in the mail, and you can even get some really cool perks. One of them being that you can submit questions for the question of the week. Also, I wanted to remind you, I'd put it in there. I think it either got lost or maybe our listeners are a little more shy than I thought, but I've got it set up where if you want to ask us a question using your voice rather than the email or leaving a comment, you can record it on your phone. Most phones have a voice recorder app where you can get one for free. And, keep it short like a call-in show and just say, your name and how long you've been on the Patreon or whatever, and then ask your question and send it in to me. You can email it from your phone, lr@lrcast.com, and I'll get it, and then we'll pick ones to listen on the show, and I can actually edit them right into the show. And so that's kind of a cool way for, again, just to give back to the patrons. We're always looking for a way to do that. So this one, though, written via computer by Mike Scott, says, do you think Shadows over Innistrad will be a synergy-based or more straightforward format? He says, I think Innistrad might be synergy-based, and following a traditional draft strategy could lead to poor results. Roughly how many drafts does it take to have some confidence that the format is a synergy-based or more traditional one?
So I'm going to preface this by saying this is a synergy-based format. There's
100%.
just a ton of stuff going on that, how the cards interact with each other is way more important than the individual power level. Though there are decks that just rely on individual power level as well. It's not about how many drafts it takes. It's part of by looking at the set. Like, you could read the Origins spoiler and think like, oh, there's a couple build-arounds, and be a little, I think, tricked. Actually, this is the thing I like least about Origins, is that none of the build-arounds were actually real. There wasn't an Elves deck, really. There wasn't an Artifact deck. These weren't really things that actually happen most of the time. But a couple drafts in, you'll realize that really quickly. Whereas some formats, you read the spoiler, and you can't help but think they're going to be synergy-based, just because there's tons of build-arounds, and there's a lot of cards that are just not obvious, like what their power level is, and clearly they have to work with other cards. Innistrad is just chock full of those.
Yeah, it's like, it feels like every other card fits that description.
I mean, when in Origins, you could say, like, that build-around enchantment, like the red one, and you'd think, like, oh, Ghirapur Aether Grid. In Innistrad, you're like, that build-around enchantment, the green one?
Yeah.
You're like, which one? Oh, the one that has to do with clues?
Yeah.
You're like, oh, but it also sacrifices. It's just, that's still 7 more enchantments.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yes, there is, and not all of them are of equal power level, but there is a lot going on, and it lives up to the hype in this terms of synergy. This is a synergy format. There's a lot of, overlapping, pieces that you have to kind of put together to build these different decks.
Yeah, and we're going to go over a few of the decks that Luis has found, and I have one that I'm partial to in the early stages here as well. And we're going to kind of get deep on those lists, and you'll start to get a feel for some of the... Basically, if we describe one deck in depth, it has a lot of information about what we expect to see. If there's a super fast format that's a straightforward beatdown deck, straightforward beatdown format, you won't be able to do some of the things that like Luis is going to recommend here, and so it'll inform that directly. Okay, so thank you, Mike, for the email. Let's crack a pack first and foremost. This is from Stefan. Yeah,
I get to actually crack. Yeah,
this is great. You get to do it. I had it in my hand and he took it, and I thought, why is he? Oh, right, he gets to do it. But you got to give me a little whiff of that.
Yeah. All right.
It kind of smells like a European pack.
So let's start with the double face card. Though, funnily enough,
it's like 4 down, I think, in the European packs. Yeah.
So that's Gut-Stuff Arsonists. And actually, I had this penciled in to go after the crack pack, but now is a perfect time to talk about this. So this Innistrad actually kind of has 2 separate draft formats going on. And this isn't a huge thing. This isn't like these are drastically different. But if you draft on Magic Online, double-faced cards don't draft any differently. You see the ones that are in the packs. You don't see the ones at the table. They're just exactly like a normal card. If you draft in person, you will see the double-faced cards when they get opened. Now, actually, for the Pro Tour, and I imagine for some other tournaments potentially, it was just announced that all the double-faced, every single card in the pack is going to be sleeved. So double-faced cards will be drafted essentially face down. Like, you won't know when someone else opens or drafts one. And that does lead to slightly different metagame calls. When you're drafting with no knowledge of double-faced cards, whether it's online or because all the packs are sleeved, then you just evaluate them straight up as their power level. There's no difference. When you're drafting in an 8-person draft where you see the double-faced cards face up, and I mentioned this earlier, but I just want to reemphasize it because watching everyone draft last week at the Grand Prix in Barcelona, people just didn't realize this. It's super important for signaling. So we're looking at Gut-Stuff Arsonists. We're not going to take this card. There's just no pack I could conceive of where you'd first pick that. But imagine that this was like an Era Falconwrath, like a much better card. Mm-hmm. There, your incentive is either to take it or not take it very quickly. And I'll give you a very practical example. Sam Black, one of the guys that I'm testing with, he was sitting there, and the person to his right opened Era Falconwrath. So this is, again, the 2-1 that flips to a 3-2. A pretty good card, a solid first pick. Sam's pack had either Sinister Concoction, the black enchantment that kills a creature, you pay all the different costs, as the best card in the pack, and Solitary Hunter, the 3/4 flip werewolf into a 5/6, as the second best card in the pack. Sam would, if the person to his right took Era Falconwrath, Sam was going to take Solitary Hunter. Person to his right is taking a black card. He's not going to then take a black card. That's also better for the person to his right, because now Sam's not drafting black.
Right.
If the person to his right took anything but Era of Falkenrath, Sam's taking Sinister Concoction. So he's first picking black card, knowing he's going to be able to second pick a black card. As it turned out, the person to his right didn't pick until time was called, so Sam didn't have that information. So Sam took Sinister Concoction, and the person to his right took Era of Falkenrath.
Brutal.
Which is just bad for both of them. So,
it's bad for both,
So
right.
if you open a powerful flip card, one you could potentially first pick. Like, again, Godstaff Arsonist doesn't mean anything. You don't need to make your decision quickly. The person to your right, or left rather, is not going to care whether you take it or not. But if you open a powerful flip card, you should either take it or not take it as quickly as possible to distribute information. It's, during the drafting process, you and the person to your left and the person to your right, think of you as a team, and you're trying to draft all better decks because there's still 5 other people at the table you want to beat.
Right.
It's not a zero-sum game in between, the whole table.
Yeah, which is such a crazy extra
it's
dynamic.
Weird. Later, you're going to be opponents. You're going to play them, but during the draft process, it actually behooves you to cooperate with the person to your left. So anyway, long story short, we're not taking Godstaff Arsonists.
Yeah, that we're definitely not doing.
Next up is Thraben Inspector. The 1/2 that comes with a clue for 1 white.
Card's really good.
Very good card.
Yeah,
I think
it's
underrated.
just like a very good card, yeah.
So I wouldn't want to first pick this, but I have. It's a card I have first pick.
I second picked it today.
Yeah,
I did.
I don't
first
think that's
picked
necessarily
Soren
wrong.
and then second picked that.
Soren pick was right. I can tell you that
I got that right.
So we've got Thraben Inspector on the board. Next up is Lamplighter of Selhoff. This is the 5-mana 3/5 that lets you loot if you've got a zombie when you play it. Not a card I try to play very often. It's playable, but not good. Definitely not a first pick. Another 3/5 for 5, Twins of Marr Estate, the 3/5 Madness. This card's good, but I would still take Thraben Inspector over it.
I like
I think Thraben Inspector is just, you can't go wrong. It's just good in every deck.
Right.
Strength of Arms is an extra card I found myself playing every now and then. The +2/+2 for 1 white, and if you have an equipment, get a 1/1.
It's a decent combat trick, pulls its weight.
This would be third for me after Twins and Thraben Inspector. Deny Existence, the counter target creature for 3 mana. This is just not a good card. I try not to play this card.
I've only played it a few times and been relatively disappointed.
This one's not bad. Intrepid Provisioner, the 4-mana 3/3 tramp.
Provisioner?
Yeah, that gives a human +2/+2. Again, the bar is set by Thraben Inspector quite high.
Yeah.
I wouldn't fault you for taking this after Thraben Inspector. Next up, we have Vessel of Volatility, the red vessel, not good at all.
Would you fault me if I took that over
I would.
Thraben
I
Inspector?
would fault you very much. Ooh, Watcher in the Web.
Like that guy.
I've watched a lot of webs this week, both in terms of Watchers of the Web and because I'm teaming with a guy nicknamed Web. But I wouldn't take it over Thraben Inspector, though. This is a very good defensive card.
The card's solid, yeah.
Ember Eye Wolf, the 2-mana 1/2 haste that pumps for +2/+0. Not a bad card, a playable one. Not a good one though.
D.
Humble the Brute. This is the Smite the Monstrous for 5 that investigates, kills a creature of power 4 or greater. I don't even like to main deck this card very much.
I've been relatively unimpressed by Humble the Brute.
So a sideboard card.
There's too many
best.
strategies that are very good against that type of.
I'm just not into 4 and 5 mana removal in this format. I just don't think that's what you want to do.
Agree.
So I'm off Humbling the Brute. Ooh, Gisa's Bidding.
Oh, I like
2
that
black,
one a lot.
sorcery, put 2/2 black zombies into play, and Madness for 2 black.
Yeah, now you're talking business.
I would take that
like
over Thraben
better,
Inspector.
yeah,
So the Bidding is just a solid card. Just casting it is good, and Madnessing it is great. Ooh, Mad Prophet. How do you feel about this? The 2/2 haste looter.
So that card's been excellent for me. Like, very, very, very good. I've played it in a few different types of decks, and it didn't matter what type of deck it was. That card's been awesome.
Yeah, I like Mad Prophet a lot.
I'm a fan.
I think I would take the Bidding over it.
I have Bidding over it. I take it over Thraben.
I would definitely take it over Thraben Inspector. So we've got Gisa's Bidding first, followed by Mad Prophet. Yep. And then now we've got a rare, got an interesting one. This is not a Windmill Slam, but it also could be the first pick. This is Drogskull Cavalry. This is 5 white for a 4/4 flyer. Whenever a spirit enters the battlefield under your control, gain 2, and you can pay 4 mana to put a 1/1 flying spirit into play.
Yeah, it's been funny watching these the 7s and the 8s because they're not very popular, right? Like people aren't first picking Drogskull Cavalry and being happy about it, but that does make the cut in a slower deck a decent percentage of the time. And then when you bump up to the 8-mana Angel of Deliverance, it's just dead. Like the card just flies around the table and nobody ever wants it.
We've mentioned this before, but the difference between 7 and 8 is not just 1.
Right.
It's every mana difference gets bigger and bigger to farther go up the curve.
And I mean, this Cavalry's arguably better, right? Like, not just at the mana cost, but like the fact that this thing gains you life while giving you inevitability is arguably better than a big dumb 6/6.
If you untap with Cavalry, you are likely to win the game.
Right, and so I like that.
Or at least
better
stabilize.
anyway. But that being said, out of this pack, I would still take Gisa's Bidding. I like it better than the 7-mana Cavalry, and I like it better than the other 2 cards that we mentioned.
I think I would take Geese's Bidding first, but I don't know. It's very close. I think.
What do you think it's close between?
The Cavalry and the Bidding.
The Cavalry, yeah.
I mean, I think Mad Prophet's also quite close. Threatened Inspector is left in the dust here, but not by a ton.
Not by a lot. So it's much higher on the list.
This is a very close cracker pack, as it turns out.
Yeah, but I like the Bidding out of that pack. Okay, so why don't we start? You talked about the double face cards. Why don't we just start getting right into it here, Luis? Let's get into the decks that you are looking to draft, and I'll frame this as well for the listeners. I mean, this is what you're looking to draft at the Pro Tour, right?
It is, and I guess I want to lay out a few not ground rules exactly, but clarification as to where I'm coming from here. First of all, my goal is not to force these decks, though the deck I like the most, I think there's a pretty good chance I end up drafting it for reasons I'll get into. This also kind of matches up with my overview of the format, which is there aren't that many aggro decks. You do have to contend with some people playing werewolves and aggro humans, aggro vampires, so it's not like aggro's dead. You can't start your curve at 4, but I have found that you're favored to not play against aggro each round. Like each round, you're less than 50% to play against an aggro deck.
Yes.
I would expect like 2 aggro decks, maybe 3 of the 8 decks drafted. Most of the decks are falling into like pretty like mid-range camp where they just have a bunch of stuff in the middle of the game.
Yeah.
All the colors are draftable. There's a lot of different color combinations. I'm not saying these are the only color combinations, but these are the decks that I've found to be quite successful. And in fact, the one I want to start with, White-Green Delirium, is one a lot of people on my team like to draft, and I've ended up drafting it a lot, and the reason being that a lot of the cards are just undervalued. So
that's the big deal, right?
Right, and
that's just a matter of identifying what the absolute best deck is, because if everybody knows that that's the case and thinks that that's the case, then all of a sudden, it loses value because people are fighting over it.
Right. The reason I mentioned that I think I'm reasonably likely to end up in this is because the cards we consider key for this deck are not cards most people have on their radars as like first or third picks. And some, I think, are cards people don't even think are playable.
So does that mean that you just get to get those cards later and you can still spend your early picks on air quotes, real cards or more solid cards?
Yes and no. First of all, I have to preface this by saying we could be wrong. I'm not claiming this is absolute truth. This is just what we've observed in our drafts over the last 3 weeks.
That's the point, though, is that we're trying to check in with you on where you're at the format headed into the
By the time most people listen to this, I'll have found out how things went. But what we're trying to do is, first of all, it's not just that you can spend your early picks on other cards, because you can. I mean, I'm never saying like, hey, you shouldn't take Duskwatch Recruiter or Bound by Silence. These are just like great cards. You will take those early. It's part of that. I think you're going to be able to get some of the cards you're looking for 6th, 7th, 10th, 12th pick just from the drafts we have done. That's a good position to be in. It just means that, in some formats like Origins, my strategy was not nearly this focused. It was just like have a good, try to draft a good curve and identify what's open. Here, it's like I'm actively going after a couple different decks because I think they'll be underdrafted. So it's a very different way of attacking the format, and you can't always do it. But I think in a complex enough format like here, where there can be these big power level valuations, these big differences in what people think cards are worth, that doesn't happen when you're evaluating cards just by themselves. Everyone knows that Fiery Impulse is good and that Topin Freeblade is good. Go to Innistrad and how good do people think Vessel of Nascency is?
Right.
The Green Vessel. How good do people think Epitaph Golem is? These are cards I'm about to explain why I like them so much. So White-Green Delirium is the first one. And it's actually White-Green X because you often splash. And the reason I like this deck is it's powerful. It's got a lot of redundant pieces. And like I just mentioned, a lot of the important cards are underdrafted. So what you're trying to do is build a control deck here that it uses Delirium. It doesn't have to have Delirium, but because it achieves Delirium so easily, you generally are able to pick up good Delirium cards because other people are not wanting them as much.
Any examples?
Moldgraph Scavenger, for example, a 2-mana 0/4 that gets +3/+0 with Delirium. It's not even that you prioritize this card, it's that you end up with 1 or 2 for free.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of good Delirium bombs, like Kindly Stranger, the 2/3 that flips to a 4/3. Black-Red Vampires, for example, might not even take that card.
No, because it's difficult.
Because it just won't be able to flip. Whereas in this, it's worth splashing for. Topplegeist is another example, the 1/1 flyer that locks something down if you have Delirium. And that card's just a removal spell if you have Delirium. It just sits there and taps their biggest creature. So you're looking to assemble ways to get Delirium and fix your mana, ways to kind of keep yourself from dying, and a bunch of these different build-arounds. And here's the key, is there's so many different build-arounds. And you get this engine going that gives you kind of an unstoppable late game. So the key commons, Angelic Purge is by far the most important. This is the sack a permanent to exile a permanent. because first of all, it's removal. And second of all, it enables delirium really well. You can put a land in the graveyard. You can maybe sack one of your other permanents if you need a specific permanent type. And you have a lot of free permanents. Like you make insects with a crawling sensation, and you end up making spirits with like cards like Dauntless Cathar, Nearheath Captain, and you just have a lot of lands because you have a lot of cards that search out lands. So Angelic Purge is by far the most important, and everyone knows this card is good. It's just the best white common. Vessel of Nascency is the big winner here. This is what we consider the best green common.
Wow, the best green common.
So for those of you who haven't played it, it's 1 green for an enchantment. You pay 1 and a green and sacrifice it. Look at your top 4 card. Choose a creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker, and put it into your hand, and then put the rest into the graveyard. And what it does is it almost enables to do them just by itself. It puts an enchantment plus 2 other cards or 3 other cards rather into your graveyard, and that's, first of all, 4 cards. Second of all, you get to choose which card. So sometimes you'll dump a card that you would consider taking just because it hits you to delirium. It also fixes your mana because you can get lands. So it's a split card that's land or spell, well, not literal spell, but land or action card that enables delirium and comes with a pretty low opportunity cost. You play it on turn 1, use it on turn 2.
Right, and on turn 1, you're often not doing anything anyway, so the opportunity cost is really minimal.
Vessel is a super high pick. Taking it over Rapid Bite, that's just going to happen.
That's insane.
Dauntless Cathar, also very important, the 3/2 that flashes back into a 1/1 flyer. Thraben Inspector, Byway Courier.
This is important because it ends up getting spilled into the graveyard.
Yeah, Dauntless Cathar gets, first of all, it's a great raid by itself.
It's also just solid.
It's a 3-mana 3/2 that trades for something and makes a 1/1. That's already good. That's just a great card. And the top commons are ones other people I think are going to know are good. Thraben Inspector and Byway Courier, again, good little value creatures. There's also like a bunch of clue synergies potentially present. Another big one here, Fork in the Road. This is another card you can get with 3 cards left very frequently. And this is, you put a land in your hand and a land into the graveyard. This enables delirium, puts sorcery and land into the graveyard. Also helps fix your mana for a 3-color deck. And sometimes you're 3 or even 4 colors. Loam Dryad, another card we expect to be drafted, the 1-mana 1/2. You just end up with a lot of cheap creatures like Thraben Inspectors and Dauntless Cathars and all the like random dorky creatures like the Scarecrow, the Wildfield Scarecrow, that sacks to get lands. And Loam Dryad helps, again, 3 to 4 color deck. Even in a 2-color deck, the card is good. It helps you just be efficient and play a bunch of cards. Rapid Bite, still a card you're going to take.
Sure.
I mean, I'm not saying you should take Loam Dryad over Rapid Bite. This is not an order of the cards. These are just like what the important commons are for the deck. And Rapid Bite is a good card. You'll still take it. It's just you won't prioritize it as much as other people. Watcher on the Web, again, a good defensive card. This is what I want to spend 5 mana on because this effectively kills multiple things. Mm-hmm. And then Moldgraph Scavenger. By just
nullifying
just when they have 2 2/2s or a 2/2 flyer and a 3/3, it can just keep everything back. Moldgraph Scavenger, also very important, just because you get it, for free, and it ends up being a pretty big threat reasonably quickly. So the build-arounds, and here's the payoffs. And I'm not mentioning specific rares here because those you shouldn't really factor too much into a deck that you're expecting to draft this often.
Right.
Like, yes, if you open the Gitrog Monster or a card like that, it's very good.
Right.
And, Drogskull Cavalry is a card that you would play in this deck and it would be good. But Crawling Sensation, this is a big one. This is the enchantment that says, at the beginning of your upkeep, you may put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard, and the first time each turn 1 or more lands is put into your graveyard, put a 1 on insect in it.
From anywhere.
Yes. So
you just get a 1/1 bug.
So you get a 1/1 bug. Also, if you put lands into the graveyard on their turn, you get a 1/1 bug. So if you have discard outlets or ways to sacrifice land or vessels,
Crack a vessel.
All those cards. And it mills yourself. And the reason that's good is it gets you delirium, and it combines really well with Epitaph Golem, a card that I have actually first picked and not felt unhappy about.
I can't wait to talk about that one. We're a couple cards.
Well, Epitaph Golem is important enough. Basically, this is the 5-mana 3/5, and you pay 2 and put the card from your graveyard on the bottom of your library. So the win condition here is if you get yourself to no cards in deck, Epitaph Golem is just Demonic Tutor every single turn. You get to choose the best card of your graveyard and draw it every turn.
Which is completely absurd. But the question, of course, because my mind is like, I see that and I'm like, that's cute, but can you actually do that? But you're saying, yes you totally, you've done that, right?
I mean, you have a deck with a Crawling Sensation, like 2 to 3 vessels, Fork in the Road, and you just go deep on your deck. You just get to use that.
Can you do the rest of the show while I go try to jump in a coverage draft and just mob on my
exactly. You get a bunch of clues, and so Epitaph Golem. It's risky in the way that if they kill the golem, sometimes you can be in a tough spot. But you have a couple solutions. One is you have a card like Macabre Waltz, which can get it back. The other is that if you're worried about this and you have a lot of mana in play, start putting multiple cards back. If you put 5 or 6 cards back, your 5 or 6 best cards might be able to win you the game before you're decked, even if the golem dies.
Yeah.
The best plan, of course, is just having multiple golems, but
right.
you can't.
But it's an uncommon, right?
It is an uncommon.
Yeah.
So Epitaph Golem, decks with Epitaph Golem, their goal is to just mill themselves and use Golem to recur Angelic Purge or a Rabid Bite or your best threat, or just win the game that way. And it's surprisingly effective.
This is where the vessels and the crawling sensations are really like turbo.
This is where they're at their best. This is where you just like some of these decks, when you don't have the Golem, you end up like not cracking a vessel because you have 7 cards left in your deck, or stop using crawling sensation because it's optional. But the Golem decks just want to go deep. Another card which has been quite good is Uvenwald Mysteries. Mm-hmm. So this is a 2 and a green enchantment. Whenever one of your creatures dies, or non-token creatures dies, investigate, so you get a clue. Whenever you sacrifice a clue, put a 1 soldier token into play.
You get a human.
So every one of your non-token creatures that dies draws you a card and gives you a 1/1 at the low cost of 2 mana. And that just draws out the game, gives you more defense, draws you more cards, draws you into more of these things, and that's just exactly what this deck is trying to do. It also has other like clue synergies with cards like Grafmole, for example. Or if you play a Thraben Inspector and crack the clue, you get a 1/1. It doesn't care where you got the clue from. So Mysteries is very good. It makes your Loam Dryad cycle. It just does all the sort of plays that this deck wants to make. And then Ongoing Investigation. This is a blue card, but this is a card that's worth splashing for. Because first of all, whenever you hit the opposing player with one of your creatures, you investigate. Second of all, and this is more relevant, when you can pay 1 and a green to gain 2 life and investigate by exiling a creature in your graveyard. So this gains you a bunch of life and gives you a bunch of clues.
And you've just got 10,
which buys you a bunch
12,
of time, which draws you more creatures, which then trigger maybe your Uvenwald Mysteries. It all just is feeding into this engine of just trying to stop your opponent from killing you and just drawing so many cards and just winning the game that way.
That just seems amazing to me. How far are you willing to go to get the self-mill going? Because we've mentioned Crawling Sensation and Vessel of Nascency, but are you Shard of Broken Glassing?
You can Shard of Broken Glass. That is a playable card. I don't love it, but it has some utility here.
How long does it usually take you to get is Epitaph Golem on on an empty library your extreme late game, or are you actually getting there quicker than I might be imagining?
It depends on the deck. It's not that quick. You're not doing this turn 5. This is still turn 10. But you have a lot of defensive options, and a lot of the cards that you want naturally just tend towards defense. You have all these cards that when they die, they make tokens, and you have these cards that gain you life, and these 2/5 reach that can block 1 million creatures.
Yeah, the Courier,
and stuff
you're
like
just
that.
blocking. And
Angelic Purge for the few threats that you can't deal with, and that sort of thing. And Crawling Sensation buys you a lot of time. It gets you a bunch of 1/1s on the way. Also, it is faster than you think. If you've got Crawling Sensation and Vessels going, you can go pretty quickly.
You get through big chunks.
If you end up with a more blue-based archetype, which I'll talk about later, you can also have various card-drawn looters, that sort of thing.
Of course. Yeah. You can have Reckless Scholars to get through.
I did play a turn 5 Epitaph Golem and have my opponent cast Startled Awake on me, which did not work out well.
Oh, no.
They milled me for 13. I'm like, wow, this is my win condition.
They tutored you for...
Yeah, so I started just tutoring.
Oh, no.
But
that's funny.
So... These are the cards. These are the big payoffs, but there's also a bunch of other premium uncommons that make this deck tick. But these are the cards that you build your deck around. The other cards I want to talk about here are the cards this deck gets to use the best, even though they're not a straight up build around. So I already mentioned Kindly Stranger. This is just at its best in one of these kinds of decks because it's just a 2/3 that flips into a 4/3 that kills a creature. If you can recurse it too. Once I have Kindly Stranger, I'm really looking for Macabre Bolts. Tooth Collector, the 3/2 that gives -1/-1 that triggers every upkeep if they have Delirium, or each of their upkeeps. This card just picks off 1/1 flyers like nobody's business. Again, good in a Delirium deck. Autumnal Gloom, Autumnal. This is the 4/4 Trample if you have Delirium, 4/4 Hexproof Trample. And this flips so easily in the deck. It's just such a good way to close out the game and to just offer a good blocker. Doppelgeist, great in this deck. And the reason I mentioned they're good in this deck is that a lot of these cards, like Autumnal Gloom, you'll just get with 4 cards left because, let's say that there's 3 green decks on the table. There's drafting this white-green Delirium deck. There's a red-green Werewolves deck. And there's a blue-green Tempo deck. You're the only one who could even put this card in their deck.
Yeah, for sure.
And so getting a 3-mana 4/4 Trample Hexproof that no one else wants, that's the value here. The value of finding decks like this is when you think a card is a 7 or an 8 because you've drafted towards it and everyone else thinks it's a 2 or a 3. Because it is for them. They're not doing anything wrong. You're just identifying inefficiencies. Wildfield Scarecrow, a very good card. 3 mana 1/4. You pay 2 and sack it to get 2 basic lands. This enables delirium, puts an artifact and a creature in your graveyard, and helps a splash or a double splash. I've double splashed off this card many times. Then, of course, Graphomole. This is the 2/4 for 3, which is good defense by itself and gains you 3 every time you sack a clue. It just buys you so much time.
That card's really been impressive to me, by the way.
Yeah, Graphomole is great.
I think we gave it a B on the set review, and it was like, it's definitely earned its keep.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't go much higher than that. I think that's where it is, but it's at its best in the blue-green clues deck, which I'm going to talk about later. There's more deepness to come. Some other notable cards, which may look like the card that you're not going to see played very often, but Stern Constable, the 1/white 1/1 that discards a card to tap a creature. If you've got Groundskeeper, if you've got ways to like Crawling Sensation, this card is actually playable. It's a Madness outlet, but you don't end up with a ton of Madness cards in this deck. And then Groundskeeper, the 1/1 1/1 that paid 2 to return a basic from your graveyard to your hand. I like this card if you're self-milling a ton and have discard outlets.
I do too. I've actually been playing more Groundskeeper than I anticipated I would.
And then Paradise Perishblade is like in the middle. This is the 3/2. It's a 4/2 first strike if you have Delirium, where it's not a premium uncommon or a bomb, but in this deck, it's very good. Also, I expect other decks to kind of take it because its fail case is not that bad. So I want to put together a rough outline of this deck. You want to end up with like 4 to 6 Delirium Enablers or more. And these are the cards like Vessel, Fork in the Road, Wildfield Scarecrow, Loam Dryad, Weirding Wood. This card's also playable in this deck. The enchantment that gets you a clue and makes your land tap for 2 mana of any color.
Why is Loam Dryad on here?
This just helps fix your mana. It's not a Delirium enabler, but this is like Delirium / mana enablers. Like these are the reasons that you can be 3 colors and the reasons that you can get to Delirium.
Okay.
And
this is kind of the backbone of the deck.
Yes, you can play more than 6. I'm not saying 4 to 6 is the number you should aim for, but if you have less than 4, your deck's probably not going to work very well. Like something like 3 Vessels, 1 to 2 Fork in the Roads, a Wildfield Scarecrow, and a Loam Dryad. That's just a configuration I've had a lot.
Okay.
Maybe 2 Vessels, 2 Fork in the Road, whatever. And that works out where your mana's right and you get Delirium quickly. And it lets you splash these off-color cards, which you're frequently going to do. You would like more than 2 removal, but you can get by with like 2 removal spells, like 1 Angelic Purge, 1 Rabid Bite. That should be enough, assuming you've got some good blockers.
Because you can just dig and find them, or?
Yeah, part of it is, these don't get found by Vessel, so they're not like super tutorable.
Yeah.
Like, Bound by Moonsilver is obviously much better, but you don't. The thing is, you have so many blockers that you don't need to kill that many creatures. This is just for like, they have, a Duskwatch Recruiter or some just like kind of absurd bomb type creature that you have to kill. It's nice to have a couple ways to kill it.
Sure.
Because Watcher on the Web does shut down a lot of offenses. And, if you go Moldgraph Scavenger, Wildfield Scarecrow, Watcher on the Web, like what is really going to kill you through that board? And there's not much, but you want a couple removal spells. And you'll play more. Like I have not ever had an Angelic Purge in my sideboard, for example. This deck just uses it so well. Key part, 1 to 3 engine cards. Epitaph Golem is key here. Crawling Sensation, Uvenhold Mysteries, all these cards. Like these are the reasons you're kind of doing this. And this is also where like the premium uncommons go. And if you can end up with like 5 or 6 of these cards, if you're in the right draft, right? Sometimes you get 5th pick Topplegeists or that sort of thing, or 7th pick Uvenhold Mysteries.
Right.
And here's where I want to talk about how to pivot to, because when I talk about all these decks today, I want to have a backup plan for all of them, because I'm not going into the draft saying like, I'm going to pick up all the cards, then in pack 3, I'm just going to get one of these build-arounds, because sometimes that doesn't happen, and you have to have a plan for when it doesn't. This deck can backdoor into the like Delirium-ish aggro deck with just a bunch of Moldgraph Scavengers and like Solitary Hunters and Dauntless Cathars, and B into like a white-green Humans deck with Intrepid Provisioner and that sort of thing, the Inspiring Captain, and the True Faith Censor. Like, it's already got these white-green cards. It can just put more combat tricks and have a better curve, and you're not wrecking yourself too much if you end up having to go this way.
Yeah, that seems actually quite reasonable as a fallback plan.
Right. But assuming you've got your like 1 to 3 engine cards or more, maybe you have 4, something like 10 to 12 creatures. Again, all the clue cards like Byway Courier and Thraben Inspector, all the spirit cards like Dauntless Cathar and Nearheath Captain, Moldgraph Scavenger, Nearheath Chaplain rather, Watcher on the Web, Solitary Hunter, just the good rate creatures.
Right, because it's easier for you are getting creatures besides your creatures.
Yes.
So it's not like you're going to have 10 creatures and those are the only times you're going to have a board presence, right?
You're accumulating like insects and spirits. I want to emphasize the defensive cards like the Watchers and the Scavengers, but again, the decent werewolves like Hermit of the Natternals and Watcher on the Web, or rather Solitary Hunter.
Solitary Hunter.
Those are fine. These are just fine cards to put in your deck. This deck is not like so linear it can't use normal cards. It's trying to get value out of its strange cards.
That's really appealing.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we talk about setup cost.
Yeah.
And, on the show a lot as this idea that there may be a big payoff down the line for taking a card or trying out a strategy, but that it's going to ask something of you. It's going to demand that you dedicate some cards, some resources, some mana, some picks in the draft, some slots in your deck. It can be expressed any number of ways, but setup cost can be quite high, and the payoff can also be quite high. But when you come to me and say, look, I've got this deck that has a powerful engine, a super strong late game, and has and is attempting to exploit a lot of value inefficiencies that we have right now, and also it can play green and white creatures and just beat down and block and do what a deck can do, that's really good. I mean, you don't see that very often in Limited.
No, and part of the key here is I'm selling Vessel partially as a delirium enabler. Your white-green deck should just be playing 2 Vessels. They'll just be good in your deck.
They're just good,
so
right?
It's just a good card.
I knew it. I knew it. I've got some words for... yeah, anyway.
And then, I have like 0-2 big win condition listed here. These kind of overlap with the engine/premium uncommons, because if you have a Kindly Stranger and you have like, a rare I want to mention is Seasons Past is insane in this deck. See,
right.
One reason Seasons Past is so good is first of all to draw 5.
Uh-huh.
You also can't deck when you have it.
Yes,
I have gotten into the Seasons Past loop. This is like
that's true of
this is
Ever
the poor
After
man's
as well.
epitaph golem.
Yes, that's true of Ever After as well.
Yeah.
We actually saw that at the GP in Barcelona. Reed Duke was playing against Huey Jensen in a win-in for top 8, and Reed, it looked like he was going to get decked, and everybody's kind of like, what is going on? Like, he keeps looting, he's going to kill himself, and then he just started casting.
Right, and that cycle of spells does it. Ever After also very good in this deck. So you don't need a huge win condition. If you have Random Angel or something like that.
I mean, like the Drog Skull.
Like the Drog Skull, Cavalry.
Cavalry is a card that would fit this description.
But you don't have to have it. Like, this you can end up going without. Something like 17 or 16 lands. I have played 17 the most, but I played 16 more than I've played 18 because Vessels, Fork in the Roads, and Loam Dryads all push you towards a slightly lower land count. You don't want to go too low. I would not go below 16. But those cards do help. So they help mitigate screw and flood.
They really do, right? Like, when you're playing Forks and sometimes when you're going to get them with your Vessel.
Don't run Warped Landscape.
You don't like Warped
That card's
Landscape?
really bad.
Okay.
It's the colorless land. It's the bad Evolving Wilds. It comes to play on tap, but you have to pay 2 and tap and sacrifice it.
Yeah, it's pretty pricey.
So I just haven't run this card. Like, you can if you have no ways to get land in the graveyard, but this deck has so many cards that do that you really just should not be running this card.
It's just not needed. Yeah, I have Warped Landscape and Necessary Evil. I've certainly played it. I think it's fine. Like, it gets what you need to get, but it's slow as all hell.
So this is my plan A. This is the deck I'm most likely to draft, just because, again, I'm gonna let's say I don't even open any card that really pushes me into the deck. Let's say I just first pick like an Angelic Purge because that card's just good. I'm going to bias towards taking green and white cards. Then if I see a 5th pick Vessel and then a 6th pick, Fork in the Road or a Wildfield Scarecrow, then I'm going to just go into it. Or at least I will try to aim towards that. I'm not going to force this, but I'm going to kind of lean towards it. So I think that...
I like this.
I think that you're likely to see this.
I really like it. I can't wait to draft this deck because this hits a lot of the things that I like to hit in Limited, man. I love the backup plan. That's the thing because, like... somebody can come up to me and show me like one of the decks that I've seen pop up is a blue-red spells deck, right? Yeah. And it's cool. I mean, it has some really powerful synergies to it. There's some really neat stuff going on. A lot of it would match up with some of the things that you've said here, right? Where there's some inefficiencies, there's some sequencing things that aren't obvious that, if you've experimented with it, you'll know about. But the setup cost is significantly higher on a deck like that, where you're taking more risk during the draft portion and where it can go so much worse during the actual, like if you just draw a whole bunch of spells that just don't do anything and your opponent has a good assertive start, you could find yourself in a pretty awkward scenario where here, you're still just casting creatures, right? Yeah. You're just like building out a board state.
And one of the strengths of this deck is that what you want to do to further your game plan lines up very nicely with normal things to do that will let you survive.
Yes.
You're just flooding the board with crap.
Playing a bunch of creatures that die and replace themselves.
And you don't care if your creatures die, and you're not running stuff like combat tricks. Every card in your deck serves a purpose. Yeah. And you're not running a bunch of narrow cards either.
I think you found something sweet.
Yeah, I think this deck's really good. I have to give a lot of credit to Sam Black too, because basically, and Justin Cohen also, that basically all three of us just sit there on our laptops just jamming drafts on Magic Online and talking about them too. And watching each other draft and getting to the point where we're really on the same page.
Yeah, see, I think that, and I mean, this goes back to how we get to have you on here and how cool it is to have access to you coming from the testing team experience, because I've been drafting nonstop. I'm probably like 20 drafts in just over the last like week and a half or something like that, between doing coverage drafts at the GP and drafting on Magic Online now, since we've been here. Oh, and by the way, we haven't mentioned it. We're in Madrid. I mean, I think that's obvious at this point, but maybe not everybody sorted that out. We're in a hotel room in Madrid. But anyway, but it is hard for me because I feel like I'm just sponging all this information, but I don't have like a team of people that are like-minded to bounce ideas off of or to come to conclusions on. So I feel much more scattered, even though I have like a lot of data points floating around in my head, and even just getting a chance to chat with you about this stuff starts to solidify some of the things that like the Vessel, like it has performed well for me where I just keep thinking like this card's fine. Like I haven't abused it like you have, but I've just never been like, this thing stinks. I've just been like, this is actually just kind of fine. Like I don't mind running one of these in the deck, and but I'll have arguments with the coverage team, and they're just like, nah, you don't need that thing, and they're trying to convince me to take it out of my decks, and I'm just like, I was right, like I gotta, that kind of thing pops up.
Well, I mean, part of it is like, I've maybe done 20 drafts or maybe a little bit more, but not a ton more, but. Besides doing those drafts, I've also watched another 20 drafts.
Exactly.
And we've discussed the contents of those drafts and why we're doing all these things.
Yeah.
And that's really what a lot of like having a team is. And,
totally.
And for listeners, I would encourage you to do this with your friends too.
Yes.
Just have TeamViewer on, have Skype, screen share on, whatever, and just talk about why you're doing a draft.
That's a great idea.
As someone who's known for not sticking around for the whole draft, like you can watch your friend draft and then leave after the draft.
Yeah.
And you can try some experimental things. It's not your draft.
Yeah.
But no, in jokes aside, that is just, it's a way to get a lot of value from not a huge time sink, and it's fun.
Yeah. I want to tell you about the deck that I've been drafting.
Okay, let's go for it.
I want to get your thoughts on it. I just drafted it yesterday.
Oh, I see you read a detailed outline here.
No,
that's what I did.
I just found it, and so I'm a little more disheveled about it. But I'll tell you what, it's really performed well. It's blue-white, and the way I would describe it is blue-white tempo. And basically, what I've been doing is taking a curve-out deck that's looking to beat down and be assertive, and I'm looking the gap that I'm trying to exploit here. Right, there's like this thing that's a little different in this format, which is that they've printed quite a few tempo spells. They've got Expose Evil, they've got
Press the Advantage,
Jace's
Scrutiny, Just the Wind, and Compelling Deterrence, and Lost in whatever, the 5-mana one.
Yeah.
Completely Lost.
Completely lost. So I'm looking at these, and a lot of these give you, in fact, all of them that we named, I think, give you a clue, right? And
just about all of them, a bunch of them.
A bunch of them give you a clue, right? And it's like, I was thinking about it, and normally these tempo plays that we get are more like Just the Wind, where they're just like a bounce spell or maybe a temporary tap effect, but that they don't replace themselves. And so what those decks usually play out is you curve out in some way, you use a few of those tempo-only spells to get your opponent's creatures out of the way and hit them a bunch, and then you have to find a way to get through for the last points of damage. And that strategy can work in normal limited, but it's pretty high risk. If you don't have the right curve and things don't sequence out properly, oftentimes your opponent can get the upper hand and it's hard for you to get it back.
Or if they kill your creatures when you're about to go for an alpha strike, you end up with no cards in your hand.
You have nothing, right? Now with this, though, you are getting your cards back. So what it lets you do is do that exact strategy that I just described and go for, an alpha kill of some sort. And then if it doesn't quite work, or if you're not quite there, then you draw a couple of cards the next turn, and then you get to do it again. And I found it real. I've drafted this deck 3 times. I went 3-0, 3-0, 2-1. And the crazy part is about, it was actually the 2-1 draft, is in the first round I played, this is on Magic Online, I played against a player that was playing blue, black, white. So not quite the same type of deck, but had 2 of my colors in their list. And then in the second round, I played against blue-white, and then in the third round, I played against blue-white. And, to me, that really stood out as, like, this deck actually might have legs because I was fighting the table. And so I got the scraps. Like, I didn't have the good cards for the deck. I had the medium stuff, and I still was able to make it to the finals. I did lose in the finals, but it was like game 3, good match, whatever. So basically the way the deck works is you get to take advantage of 2 things. One, I already said, the fact that you get clues. The other one is Dauntless Cathar, and if you're lucky, Near Heath Chaplain. Those are another, in a similar way of getting to use your card, and if they kill it, you still have a way to finish off the game. what I found myself doing was using cards like Expose Evil specifically, and then I always forget. So one, Press for Answers.
Press the Advantage.
Press the Advantage is the tap one.
Or Press for Answers. One of the two.
Whatever, but that's the tap one, right? So it taps down, it's a sorcery, but it taps down your opponent's creature and it stays tapped. Those are the two that I've really thought performed the best. And the deck plays out how you think it would. It tries to play evasive threats and have a good curve. And then it uses those clues and then the fact that you can get creatures back off the other ones to basically tempo your opponent out. And what I've realized is that there's certain strategies that this is very, very good against. So the ones that I've noticed are werewolves. So they're playing big, dumb red and green stuff, and you're just like, sweet. Like, that's all I want you to do.
Over the history of Magic, the red-green monsters deck has always had a bad match against the blue-white flyers deck.
Exactly. That's just exactly how this works, and these tempo plays are maximized against the big dumb
I imagine
flyers.
Stitch Mangler is pretty good in this deck, too.
Very good in this deck, yes. That card comes up all the time. Great point. The other types of strategies that you don't mind are, and this is partially why I really like what you came up with the white-green, are the full-on Dirtle decks, like the ones that are like playing a lot of these enchantments that don't do anything for a turn or two or take a while to start generating advantage, or they generate minimal advantage. Like, oh, I got a 1/1 off of my 3-mana enchantment the next turn, right? Like, that's the kind of stuff that if you go 2-drop, 3-drop, or 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop, and your hand has 2 or 3 tempo plays, you're just licking your chops because you're getting in for 12
They're going
or
to tap
15.
out for Watcher on the web, and you're going to press for answers and just send,
and they're dead, right? And that happens pretty easily. Another one that happened, my opponent, just another, random example, they played a Slayer's Plate, which is a pretty good card. I mean, that card's a beating. Like, if you're sitting there trying to grind it out and they're just making every creature they have into something that must be blocked, it can be good. And all I was doing was yelling at my laptop, please just try to equip. And they did twice, and that was it. It's just like they just straight up couldn't win from that point. And so, for looking at strategies in this way, big dumb stuff / I'm going to take my time to get cute and do a bunch of stuff. This deck really does tend to punish them. Cards you really, really want. I mean, Nearheath Chaplain's probably the best non-rare that you can get in it because it creates multiple evasive threats and also makes it impossible for your opponent to race you, which is fantastic. Dauntless Cathar is huge. The issues, and we should probably talk about the weaknesses for some of these decks, or at least just touch on it.
Assuming they have them, yeah.
If they don't, then they don't. But this one does. 2-drops. 2-drops are really tough.
Yeah, your tempo plays against 2-drops just aren't that effective.
Yes, and the 2-drops you get aren't great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you would love to play. Like, I've played the Fox.
Yeah.
That's fine. Like, that guy, that thing can do what you need to do and can beat down at the 2-mana slot. But, Unruly Mob is, not good in this deck. Like, your creatures ideally just aren't dying, so that's not a thing. The Skulker is, sure, you play it, but, the Homunculus. But, that's not great either. Just as a card, it's not that great. So your best things come at 3 and then a few at 4. And things get a little awkward because at 4, you've got Silent Observer, but that's really not the kind of card you want. You'd basically, if you can get the Researcher, Aberrant Researcher, that's insane, right?
That's great.
Yeah, and even just as a 3-powered flyer, you're super happy to have it. Anyway, I have convinced myself that this deck is real. If I were going into the PT and I had only been testing on my own and I didn't know you, this is a deck I would be keeping my eye out for because it shuts out some strategies and has game against the rest of them, and that feels like that's pretty. That's a good place to be.
I'm not going to name names, but there's at least one person on my team who's basically going to force this deck.
Okay.
So, or not full on, but they are very leaning towards drafting this deck in particular.
Okay.
Since you are right, it is definitely a deck. It also gets to use Spectral Shepherd, the the 2 and a white for a 2/2 flyer that you can pay 1 and a blue.
Oh, yeah.
To bounce one of your spirits.
Totally. Have that
and
guy.
that card is just a good rate flyer, 3-mana 2/2 flyer with a good ability.
Yeah.
And that's also quite relevant.
And of course you get all the, it's easy to, because I'm trying to focus on the cards that like matter for this deck, but you get Sleep Paralysis, you get Bound by Moonsilver, you get
all the normal good cards too.
Yeah, that you just get to shut people out with, and then, God forbid you open a rare or whatever, and you get even better. But like I said, the thing is, I had 2 versions of the deck that I thought were good. Like, one had 2 Near Heath Chaplains in it, and the card's just busted. And the other one had a couple of rares or something. And I thought, well, maybe it's skewed. But then I fought the table for this deck and ended up with all commons, literally no rares, and it still did just fine.
The deck is just fine on commons.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, so that's the deck that I've had my eye on the most, and I think I would probably try to push for, at least be partial to it in the BT.
So another deck I like, and this is not as focused as the first one, is kind of blue-green clues.
Okay, this is one we had our eye on at the beginning.
Yeah, this was one of,
but there's a lot of moving parts here.
People could see that there's obviously, this is a thing. And this deck is, again, a little less focused because it can go a couple different directions. You're not nearly as single-minded, but it has a lot of good permutations. And Investigate is a very powerful mechanic intrinsically because, like you said, you get your card back on a lot of your cards, so a lot of your cards cycle, and there's a bunch of synergies that go with it. So Vessel of Nascency for commons. Vessel of Nascency is still important here. I would still take this over Rabid Bite early because you don't know where you're going to end up, and I think Vessel's overall better. There's just decks that use Vessel much more
it's importantly. It's a wider...
Yeah, basically, if you end up red-green or white-green, Beatdown, werewolves
then
or white-green humans, Rabid Bite's
right?
much better.
Okay, yeah.
But if you end up in blue-green or white-green Delirium or black-green Delirium, then I think that Vessel is much better. And I think Vessel's actually a better card.
Okay, and then, the key here, though, is that not, this is better here, but you can play Vessel in your red-green werewolf
you can play it there. It's not nearly as good.
Right.
Sometimes you'll cut it, but you can still play it both decks. And I've had blue-green tempo decks that are fine playing Vessel. Also, sometimes your creatures end up being kind of small, and Rabid Bite's just not the best.
Yep.
But you still take Rabid Bite, Vessel, I think, above it. Then Byway Courier and Stitched Mangler are both quite good in this deck. They're just good board presence creatures. They don't cost anything to put in your deck.
Yeah, Stitched Mangler's been very solid for me.
Solitary Hunter, again, still just good rate creature. And here's the best. This is the best Confront the Unknown deck. This is the 1-green Investigate, then +1/+1 to a creature for each clue you have. Sometimes this is +3/+3 or +4/+4 for 1 mana, and you get your card back. That is absurd. That's absurd. That's part of the reason that you're in this clue deck. I've seen double Confront the Unknown end some games from a high life total.
How early are you taking it?
I'm not taking it really early. And the key with all these decks isn't that I think you should just draft these decks because they're great. It's that these decks use a lot of cards other people don't want.
Yeah.
A lot of people just aren't taking Confront the Unknown. You'll get it 6th pick, 7th pick.
Yeah, because it is funny because we just talked about that for blue-white and, looking at the list here as well, is these are all the cards that are under the obviously powerful, the Bound by Moonsilvers that we just talked about for the blue-white deck. And here, whatever, I don't know if the Sleep Paralysis is where it sits on this, but these type of cards.
So I like Jace's Scrutiny and Just the Wind more than Sleep Paralysis in this deck. Jace's Scrutiny actually is very underrated. The card's quite good.
I've gotten a lot more 2-for-1s out of that than I ever thought I would.
The card is really good. And it has the extra clue synergies here. I'm pretty off Sleep Paralysis. I'll play one in a lot of my blue decks, but it's really not a card I prioritize. This is not Claustrophobia. Adding an extra mana to it is just not even close to the same card.
Okay, I've been playing it.
Yeah, so this deck, it's a playable card. It's not. I'm not saying you should just be cutting these, but I'm taking Jace's Scrutiny most of the time over Sleep Paralysis.
Wow, okay.
You literally can't stop me.
Okay, I'm not.
So the build arounds for this deck, Ongoing Investigation is the best one. This card is just a legit bomb. The card is great. And it's obviously at its best in blue-green where both modes are just on, especially a more tempo version of blue-green. This is where Confront the Unknown just gets gross. Erdwall Illuminator.
So,
card, the 2-mana 1/3. The first time you investigate,
little
turn,
sad
get an
ghost.
extra clue. In one of the house drafts, when we were drafting, we first picked this over Jace, and I think that's a reasonable pick.
Wow, that's insane.
Yeah, Erdwall Illuminator is just a great card. It's a 2-mana 1/3 that, first of all, it plus Ongoing Investigation is just the best combo ever.
That's absurd.
It's a 1/3 flyer that's hard to block, and it makes 2 clues a turn.
Yeah, that's just...
Second of all, it lets you double up on so many cards in your deck, and 2-mana 1/3 flyer, just a good rate. Graph Mole is great in this deck. You're just unkillable when you have Graph Mole. It gains you 12 life sometimes.
Yeah, it's also a good thing to have in your list in case you do get off to a slow start because it's the thing that can get you back up.
You get hit down to 8 and then all of a sudden you crack 2 clues and you're at 14.
Yeah, it's just stupid.
Ulvenwald Mystery is good in this deck as well. And then Fleeting Memories and Manic Scribe are kind of interesting subcategories. So this is Fleeting Memories is the enchantment. This is the other build-around enchantment, not Trail of Mystery, no, a different one.
Right.
This is 2 and a blue, Investigate, and then whenever you crack a clue, mill your opponent for 3. And then
3.
Manic Scribe's a 2-mana 0/3 that mills them for 3 when you play it, then Delirium mills them for 3 every turn. So milling your opponent's a tricky business in this format because often it'll give them an advantage. But Fleeting Memories...
Until they're dead.
Until they're dead. Because it'll turn on their Delirium and put their Dauntless Cathars in their graveyard. But Fleeting Memories is a legit finisher in the clue deck. When you have Graph Mole, Ongoing Investigation, and Fleeting Memories, they're just not going to kill you and you're going to mill them out.
Do you tend to save up a bunch of clues so that you minimize that?
It depends on what I'm playing against. If I'm playing against red-green werewolves, I'm just going to mill them whenever I can because they just can't do anything.
It doesn't matter.
But if I'm playing against a Delirium deck that isn't on, then I might wait. But if once they're on, it doesn't hurt you to mill them more unless you're milling.
Because it's pretty easy if you're generating a lot of clues to say, they say go, you sack 3 of them, mill them, and then on your turn you sack the other 2 and you 15 carded them or whatever.
This is kind of a tangent going back to the blue-white deck, but this reminded me of, when you mill them hitting the wrong cards. Griff's Boon is, I think, just the nuts.
That
card has been fantastic.
Really good. Yeah, so, especially getting it out of the graveyard.
Yeah,
right?
so I think Griff's Boon is actually a legit
app.
player. So
okay,
and I think it's good in the blue-white deck as well.
I have not had it in the blue-white deck.
Yeah, a lot of your creatures are flying.
Yeah,
if you have 8 flyers, maybe you're less excited, but putting it on a Fox and then just be able to get it back later.
That's insane. I think you could probably just hit once and be really happy with that outcome.
Yeah, you can just Fox your opponent up really easily like that. In general, Fleeting Memories is on the low end of build-arounds. I just take it late, and sometimes in the really dedicated clue deck you get there. So what this deck pivots into is like a blue-green tempo deck. Like the clue thing can be as big or as little of a theme as you want it to be. Like one of the reasons blue-green is so good is just all the cards are good. You're not making very many sacrifices by just playing these cards. So yes, if you have Illuminator and Graph Mole and Ongoing Investigation, all of a sudden you just want to jam all the clue stuff in there. Sometimes you just have Solitary Hunters, Stitched Manglers, Adjust the Wind, a Niblis of Dusk, and you just get in there.
And you just get in. And
you don't need to worry about it. Jason Scrutiny is just a good card in that deck, for example. This deck also gets access to some premium uncommons. Reckless Color is pretty good in this deck. Worse than I thought. I'm not really high on this card. Yeah, it's just been a little slow and vulnerable. There's also just not as many madness cards. I just find that people
always kill it at the very first.
Yes, that is part of it. So acting as a lightning rod isn't bad, but you still can. You still take it and play in the deck. It's still a good card, but unless you're in the blue-red Madness deck with 7 Madness cards, the card is just fine.
Okay.
Pour of the Pages is quite good. This is the draw 3, discard 1, untap 2 lands. The card's very good.
That feels real nice.
It's also a mini combo with Weirding Wood. Weirding Wood is another card I like playing. Oh, because the land taps for 2, so you get to bam.
I like the mini
This deck can also sometimes be the Epitaph Golem deck if it's got enough of the mill aspect too. Maybe instead of the white for Angelic Purges, you just end up blue because you have an Ongoing Investigation, a couple bounce spells, and then just you're going that direction because you're still base green. So I like this deck. Blue-green is a deck that's pretty easy to draft. The first 3 drafts that Ben Stark did on Magic Online, he just ended up through blue-green 3 times in a row. Not because any other reason, just all the cards were so good. He just naturally did it. So he had to force himself not to draft blue-green to experience other parts of the format. And I think the deck is good. I think it's again a low-risk venture because even less than Delirium, the white-green deck, you're not taking cards like Fork in the Road that are, clearly you're not playing this card unless you're actually going for it. This deck's just taking all good cards, and sometimes they combine for more.
So, if you had to say a weakness about the blue-green deck, what would it be? Is there an archetype that just kind of
No, I don't think there's an archetype that really runs it over. Its creatures can be a little on the small side. If you end up with too many of the blue creatures and fewer of the green ones, you'll end up smaller than a lot of the werewolves decks.
But then you get to just bounce.
But the bounce is so good. The bounce bounce, Stitch Mangler, that sort of thing shores up a lot of your weaknesses. So, if you end up with no synergies, your deck can be kind of underpowered, and you don't want to have too much, you can end up with this awkward mix of, I've got some bounce spells and some 2/3 tempo guys, but I also have some defensive-ish guys and vessels, and I don't really get there.
Right.
So you have to watch out for that.
Okay.
So the last deck I want to talk about is blue-red. And blue-red again, and this is why I love this format, by the way. There's just so many decks within decks. Blue-red does not just mean a deck. Blue-red means blue-red Madness, blue-red Tempo, and blue-red all spells. And these are 3 decks that blur. You can have aspects of each in the same deck, but they're 3 distinct decks too, depending on how the cards end.
Yeah, I've actually seen different. I would categorize all 3. I've seen all 3 of these actually.
Right, and
one of them
that's really interesting. Mm-hmm. So This is when we talked about having a 5-creature deck. You can do that in this format, and it is awesome.
Yeah, it's funny. We had that discussion, I think during the set review or whatever. And it's like, here we are.
Yep. So no matter which of the decks you're in, Fiery Temper is just the best common.
Yep.
It's just not close.
Card's insane.
And another card which has been really good is Pyrehound.
Oh yeah.
And the fact that you get a common build around that's at the level of uncommon build arounds is absurd.
Yeah, you and I both commented that it read like an uncommon when we first saw it.
Yeah, if you play a Pyrehound and they don't kill it and it's just a 5/6 in 2 turns.
Trampler.
Yeah, it's really hard to stop. So those are the most important commons. Later in the draft, you won't take Pyrehound if you know you're not that direction, like if you have too many creatures. But early in the draft, I think Pyrehound's quite a good early pick. And then you have this like kind of suite of different cards that do similar things, like Tormenting Voice and Catalog as discard outlets. Tormenting Voice is better because it's cheaper, but they're both solid. They both enable madness. They both put spells in the graveyard and get through your deck. Just the Wind and Jace's Scrutiny as like spell-based ways to get tempo or, kind of go through your deck with Jace's Scrutiny or get a kind of card advantage off discarding Just the Wind to an effect to bounce a thing. You're not really costing yourself a card. Mm-hmm. And then you still have like Stitch Mangler and Press the Advantage as like the tempo plays. And then Nagging Thoughts is kind of like the backup card draw. This is the look at 2, put one in the graveyard and one in your hand. And it has madness, so sometimes you'll just discard a Tormenting Voice, get +1 card, that sort of thing. And then Blood Mad Vampire. This is the 4/1 that has madness of 1 in a red. And discard's good because even in a creature-light deck, I played it with like 6 creatures in my deck because you're discarding it to a different spell.
It's free.
It's a 2-mana 4/1 draw card.
Yeah.
That's just a great card.
Yeah, that's great.
Note I did not put Sleep Paralysis and Reduce to Ashes on the list because even though those cards are both playable, I don't think they're high priorities. I just don't like the expensive removal.
I have really not liked Reduce to Ashes. Like I said, I've been playing Sleep Paralysis, but Reduce to Ashes has been abysmally slow for me.
Yeah. So the real this is not like the other decks where you have like a bunch of different like kind of overlapping build around uncommons. Here you have Rise from the Tides, and that is your build around uncommon.
That's your big finisher.
If you have Rise from the Tides, or even 2 Rise from the Tides if you're lucky, this is your Spider Spawning. This is, I have 4 creatures, it doesn't matter, I'm going to cast this and make 7 zombies. So Rise from the Tides is a great card. I actually put Pyrohound here as well, because it just counts as a build around, even though it happens to be a common. Some of my lowest creature count decks just have 3 Pyrohounds and a couple other just random creatures, with the Pyrohounds being the finishers. And one of your weaknesses while we're talking about that is that if you have a 3 Pyrohound deck and you play against a deck with a lot of removal or multiple bounce spells, it can be problematic. Yeah. That's why Rise from the Tides is so good. It's not really vulnerable to anything. There's no like uncommon sweeper besides Biting Rain that's really going to get you.
Right.
Geist Blast is a great card to beat if you're in this deck.
So good.
I told BDM I would mention that you can Lightning Axe, discarding Geist Blast, and then exile Geist Blast to copy the Lightning Axe. That is a gross play.
He was on my team. He goes, Marshall, come here. I got to ask you something. He goes, does this work? And I'm like, it's in the graveyard. It's part of the cost. And like, it works. He's like, okay. Yeah. He goes back and I hear, like, he's 2 tables away and I hear him announce the play, in classic BDM above the, and just wreck. He also, by the way, did that with the Malevolent.
Oh, the threaten.
The threaten effect. Yeah. He did that so he did twice and then,
Anyway. So Geist Blast,
gross.
Pretty sweet card. It also combines nicely with Rise from the Tides if you have 9 mana left.
Yes, and I have been the victim of that. Yeah. 14 zombies later.
The red and blue looters, Reckless Scholar, Mad Prophet, are at their best here. These are cards that would get me into this deck.
This is the spot.
And then Trail of Evidence. This is the 2 and a blue enchantment that whenever you play an instant or sorcery investigate. I have not had success with this card yet, though I know people who have.
It feels like it would go in there.
So I think if you are in the All Spells Rise from the Tides deck, it can get there, but it's pretty borderline.
I mean, is that good? Like, I need to see it.
It can be. It's like Overworld Mysteries. It's like all your spells come with 2 mana draw card.
That's great.
And that is good. It's just if you have 14 or 15 spells in your deck.
Yeah.
I have to note that Pieces of the Puzzle, the common for 2 and a blue, look at your top 5, put up to 2 spells into your hand. This card isn't good. I've even had it with like 15 spells. I don't think it's good. So.
Yeah, I keep telling people that card's... And this is in that deck, and I just still don't like it.
I generally do not like the card.
Yeah. So the one... Hold on, I did have one quick question about that card, though. Somebody tried to appeal to me on that by saying that, well, if you have a Rise from the Tides, you need to find it. It like digs you deeper to it. Is that legit?
But even then, I'd rather just use it with other card draw.
Yeah.
I mean, you can play the card. I just don't like it.
Okay.
So the real like demarcation here is whether you pick up a Rise from the Tides and if you get a bunch of Pyrohounds, then you can be like the all spells, like really like the 14-15 spell deck. I also have to mention Thing in the Ice here because that's the rare build around that goes with this. Also, a lot of random other cards are horrors.
Yes, you find that out very quickly.
The 2/2 Double Strike Wolf,
Scourge
Forgotten
Wolf.
Creation. Also, Kessig Dire Swine.
Yes.
I played against it and I'm like, all right, Thing in the Ice. My opponent just looks at me and I'm like, right.
Right, yeah, well, you had a good blocker.
Then they had a chump, but whatever. But if you don't have those, and here's where you pivot into blue-red tempo, and this is Voldaren Duelist, Stitch Mangler, trying to curve out a little bit more, use the bounce spells to good effect. This deck's great. Voldaren Duelist is just a fantastic card. This is the 3/2 haste that makes a creature unable to block.
Yeah, it's just one of the scariest cards.
And then
do you use Sanguinary Mage in this?
Yeah, Sanguinary Mage is quite good in all these decks.
Yeah, okay.
This is the 1/3 prowess for 2. And then there's Blue-Red Madness, which is kind of in the middle of these two, where it can be, it can have aspects of both. And here's where like Blood Mad Vampire and Just the Wind kind of, tick up a notch. So I like Blue-Red, and I think that there's a decent chance that I end up drafting either white-green, blue-green, or blue-red. With touches of black, depending, on the deck. The 2 green decks can splash pretty easily.
You should draft blue-white.
There's a chance. I mean, I'm not closing myself off to these things. Like, I'm not saying I'm not going to draft blue-white. I'm not going to draft red-green or red-black. These are all decks, and I'm confident in drafting them. But I think there's more value attached to these other decks because I think that my evaluation of the cards is different than other people's to a degree where I'm getting an edge.
Yeah.
May or may not be true, but I do like the idea.
Do you think that the degree of difficulty on the blue-red deck also adds to that? Because these are some really tricky
So if I had to give these on a 1 to 10 scale, I think that in terms of drafting and playing, so drafting is 1 degree of difficulty and playing is another. I would say that the white-green deck's like an 8 out of 10 on drafting because it has a lot of distinct... And there's a reason I actually gave an outline of what a deck's supposed to look like. I didn't for blue-red and blue-green because the decks all look very different and they're just pretty easy. Like, draft your good cards, you just play all of them.
Yeah.
There's not like a set archetype. But because you're trying to hit delirium exactly 4 cards of each type, the white-green deck is a lot more precise as to what it wants.
Of course.
And like the first instant is worth so much more in the first enchantment. And you end up with enchantment actually a lot because of vessels, maybe dead weight. But I would say that the white-green deck's like an 8 out of 10 in terms of drafting because you just have to know what every single card you're taking does. I would say that the blue-red deck is probably next with like a 6 or a 7 because sometimes you'll just lock in early. You'll like... first pick Lightning Axe, second pick Thing in the Ice, and third pick Firehound, fourth pick Rhythmatize to really go be absurd.
Right.
And then it's very easy to figure it out.
But then you know what you're doing.
Or you just still,
it's not, right? Like if you're really running a 5 or 6 creature deck, that is out of a lot of people's comfort zone for a limited
just
deck,
take the spells that are effective. Just take all the spells. Scrutiny, Press for Answers, Just the Wind, Compelling Deterrence, Lightning Axe, Fiery Temper. Just take all those cards. And then the blue-green deck, I'd say, is not that hard to draft because besides from some of the cards that care about clues, that the order is just going to go by curve.
Sure.
In terms of playing, I think the white-green deck's also quite hard to play. So I'd encourage you to try the deck. I think it's very powerful, but it takes some practice.
Yeah.
And, I did a lot of losing on the way to figure it out.
Sure.
I'd say the blue-red deck and the blue-green deck aren't that hard to play. Like these are closer to average or maybe a little above average, but you're just kind of playing your cards. So... other decks, there's red-green werewolves, there's red-black vampires.
Which, by the way, have both seemed quite fine to me, too.
They're fine. I
feel like they're known quantities, and it's not necessarily,
I think red-black vampire is not great. I think sometimes the cards will be there, but often they won't. Red-green werewolves is fine.
Have you played against Stensia Masquerade much?
Yeah, Stensia Masquerade is a beating.
It's a beating.
In a dedicated deck.
Again, another reason why I like the blue-white deck is you want them to play that.
Oh, right. That's the exact kind of card you love for them to play.
All these things that just don't do anything. Yeah, equipment, Stensia Masquerade.
So I'm hoping all this spinning of wheels and dirtling is the right path, but I think this is the path I'm going down. So
okay. Well, this is really cool. Awesome. Thanks, for gathering the information for us. I know that obviously you've had a really busy week testing. And B, I think it'll be really interesting. We'll get a follow up from you on the next show just to say how did it go. How did your drafts go? Maybe you ended up in white green like you wanted. I
drafted red black vampires twice.
Yeah,
I went 3 and 3.
Yeah, I mean that does happen.
No fun was had.
Yeah, and I mean, but exactly. Yeah, that it's going to be you're at the mercy of your seat as much as anything.
This is one of the tournaments where I think I can predict with more accuracy what I'll be drafting. Again, I want to emphasize, I'm not going in forcing these decks. I'm not going to first pick Vessel over like Lightning Axe because I want to draft white-green. That would be deranged. But I do think that all things being equal, I'm, a higher percentage to draft these 3 decks than... Probably the percentage of drafting these 2 decks combined is probably greater than the other, whatever other rest of the deck, the format is.
You've also covered a lot of the colors here, right?
I have.
Only black.
Black is the only mean color I haven't talked about, but you still play it frequently in the 2 green decks. So
this does give you...
I think I'm flexible. I think I'm going to draft, whatever I think is the most open, but I think these decks are most likely to see they're open because I value the cards differently than other people.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this has been really cool. And like I said, you'll see this from players that play a lot of drafts is that you and I immediately we're looking for the gaps, right? We're looking for the decks that aren't as obvious, and that's why I've latched onto this blue-white deck, and you've latched onto these decks. Is that it's just totally we can all see the red-green decks and the black-red decks and stuff. Those are all pretty straightforward. Okay, well, why don't we call it a show here, Luis? I want to let you get back to any other testing or whatever that you need to do. And you've got one more day until the Pro Tour, so I'm sure you've got a lot of stuff that you need to lock in and get sorted out, or food to eat or whatever it is. And we'll do that. And so we'll call it a show here. Of course, this show is brought to you by channelfireball.com. You can go there. Again, I'll put a link in the show notes to the clickable set review if you haven't seen it yet. It's a really cool tool and hopefully something that we can continue to do going down the line. I'm not really sure how that's going to work quite yet because there is a decent amount of work that goes into getting the web pages set up and everything like that. But we'll try to work it out. And you can check that out. And I did want to say once again, thanks to Andrew Purnell as well as Channel Fireball, the web developers and the content, guys, Andy and everybody over at CFB helped get that sorted out as well. And that just wouldn't have happened without that because I can't put stuff up on Channel Fireball's website, right? And there's some translation that needs to happen with the code, and they were really great about it to get that.
I don't really know how that happens.
Right.
No saying.
Well, we sent a lot of emails, but they did all the work for it as far
I'm
as...
just kidding.
You have no idea how it works.
I was the editor. I used to upload posts myself.
Come on.
All right, I'm going to edit your next article to look bad.
Well, thankfully, I don't have any articles going. And I did a lot of work making my first draft video for Shadows look bad enough. Don't worry. Let's just say I killed myself. Yeah, I killed myself with my own triskaidekaphobia. So that's not the greatest. But that is another thing that you can find on Channel Fireball. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can email us lr@lrcast. Again, if you're on the Patreon and you want to send us a voicemail, you can do that. Just record it on your phone and send it in. You do have to be on the Patreon though to do that because otherwise I'll get too many of them, and I want to make it like an extra bonus for people that are on the Patreon. That will do it for the show this week though, Luis. Once again, thanks for taking the time out of your busy testing schedule to make time for the show. We'll be back home by the time we record. Next time I'll be almost on my way to Toronto. But we'll record from our normal sitting spaces in Denver and Seattle. Yeah. But that's going to do it. Thanks a lot for hanging out. We'll see you next time.
So we were talking about the new clickable set review. That brings me to our today's sign off. And that would be the top 7 killer apps brought to you by Limited Resources.
He's been working on this sign off since dinner. Like walking to dinner, walking back.
And it's top 7 because odd numbers are better. This is the king of Buttermedia Media has told me this himself. That's not Marshall, by the way.
Oh, God, no.
So we're going to start with number 7. And we're even starting with something that I contributed. Since I will not spare myself. That would be Cabs/Uber.
Yes.
So Cabs Uber theories. First of all, Cabs is card that affect the board strategy theory, but I also call it Cabs
state strategy. Yes, cards that affect the board state was what I was trying to say, and then you're like Cabs, and I was like dismissed you, and then it just became Cabs.
Cards that affect the board strategy theory is our first. That's our first killer app. No, I put it into the same category so we get 7 instead of 8, and that would be Uber. This is my one up because Uber is better than a cab.
What does this stand for?
Ultimate big end game ramp theory.
You just made that up completely because you wanted it to be Uber. I do think the
episode where we talked about Uber was quite good because it does describe a lot of how I drafted. And in fact, the episode today even described some very Uber theories and not very many Cabs theories.
That is true what you said.
Another one would be...
Uber's ridiculous.
Hey, it's the killer app. It kind of is too. Setup cost. And this is, of course... what prices are you paying to get this plan in action? What bad cards are you playing to make your nonsense work? How many turns are you playing equipment before you can equip your guy who cares about equipment, and how much mana is lost when you get bounced? So yeah, I think this is a useful theory as well. The next one would be don't be rotty.
Don't be rotty, of course, that goes back all the way. I got maybe our first episode or the second episode, which is results-oriented thinking. That was a thing that Ryan and I ported over. We needed to make it an adverb or whatever. Yeah, a killer app. We brought that over from poker, and it's basically, just a way to say...
If you made the right play and things ended up badly, it doesn't mean you shouldn't make that play again.
Exactly. And that was a trap that... It still is a trap that a lot of people fall into.
That's a trap that human beings fall into.
Yeah, it's funny. I think that, if I had to sum up, our message on the show, that would probably be the one. Because if you can follow that, then I think that a lot of doors open up for you about, being results-oriented.
Yeah, and I think that it's just our natural human tendency to be that. So,
Yeah.
so I think following that killer app is a good way to not.
You just
Next one is BCSM, which Marshall has assured me is appropriate for the show. Can you explain that?
It is, yeah. That's best case scenario mentality, which is a cousin of don't be erotic. But basically, we would constantly see people try out a new card, have success with it, and then come back lauding about how amazing the card was.
My best example of this is actually from my written set reviews back in, what was it, Dragons of Tarkir or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
No, Fate Reforged. Inspiring Call. This is 2 and a green. All your creatures become indestructible. Draw a card for each creature with a ++1 counter on it.
Yes, I remember.
I gave this card a very low grade. I said this card's super situational.
A lot of setup costs.
Someone responded, the worst case scenario is you draw 2 cards. And I'm like, no, that's not the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is you draw 0 cards.
Yes.
And this is best case scenario mentality.
Yeah, and the real kicker with that, and I think
we talked about this last week with Sin Prodder, right?
Yeah, totally.
Everyone looks at Sin Prodder and is like, oh,
you're just drawing free cards.
Yeah,
But I think the real one is when cards are in your hand and you don't play them. And a lot of people will never properly gauge the fact that having that card in their hand when they never found a spot to play it was horrific for them.
Yeah, they lost the game by that card just being a brick.
Right, but you know what? It doesn't feel like that because having never played it, you think, well, I never even got to play it.
One of the key parts about killer apps is snappiness. So let's let's move on to one I harp on all the time.
We might want to do this as a show.
Oh, I know. But
not here, but
The top 10 traps unlimited started as a sign off. So
it did.
It's a rich and storied tradition. It's one of the killer apps I bring.
And we obviously should have made it the top 9 traps. Although Lava Ball Trap might have not counted.
I hadn't learned that by then. That would be so. This next one is one I harp on a lot, which is having a plan. Which is every pick of the draft, every in-game decision should be leading towards an ultimate plan. I mean, listen to the decks I talked about today. You do not take, I guess I need to take this card because it's a good card. That's not how these decks generally work, and you're going to go very badly if you do that. And playing all these decks and playing every deck in Limited, every single game of Magic you play, have a plan. Don't just be taking game actions. And this is like the most common thing that I have to talk about because I think it's so important. And this is consistently the answer when someone's like, hey, what makes a great player great and a good player good? And it's like the difference is having a plan. Having a plan is the killer app. Vanilla Test is a great one. This is, of course, something that it's easy to take for granted.
This is one that Ryan brought to the show as well, and it's basically just a baseline for evaluating cards by looking creatures mainly by looking at their converted mana cost and comparing it to their power and toughness. And the reason why we brought it up was because a lot of people looked at the text box, saw a mediocre upside, and then said this card's not very good, while ignoring the fact that it was actually quite playable. On its own.
Imagine a 3 for 3 that says 5 mana, disgains protection from squirrels.
Right.
Right.
A lot of people were like, I don't really care about squirrels.
But it's like 3 for 3.
Yeah, it's
Play
already
3 for 3.
Yeah, so it's just a shortcut to help you evaluate creatures.
And the ones that are the most useful is 1 for 1 is bad, 2 for 2 is good, 3 for 3 is a little better than good actually.
Very good.
And then 3 for 4 is average. 4 for 4 is great.
Great.
And 4 for 5 is average.
Right. So, and then you've got all the
kind of scales up a little bit from there. And there's also little stairs in between with 2 3s and 3 4s and whatnot. And it's also format dependent, but Vanilla Test, definitely a killer app. And also I forgot to do this when announcing this whole sign off is that you won't believe number 1.
This one strange trick.
Yeah, this one strange killer app is Quadrant Theory. I like this one a lot, even though I was talking to you on the way back from dinner today. So Quadrant Theory, of course, is the different stages of the game where you evaluate a card. And I want to refresh us on that.
Yeah, so this is Brian Wong, brought this to the show, and we immediately embraced it. And so basically you've got the developing stage of the game, you've got when you're at parity, you've got when you're behind, and you've got when you're ahead. And it's really useful to take a card and look at it and say, which stages of the game is this card good at? And you'll often get a really good picture of how good a card is in general by putting it on that scale. It helps you envision different scenarios throughout the course of the game rather than just saying this card's good or this card's bad.
Right. It helps you realize why Flameblade Angel, this is the 6 mana 4/4 flyer that pings your opponent for 1 whenever you take damage from one of their creatures or one of your creatures takes damage.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
This card is a good card. I'm not saying this card is bad. This card is not very good in your behind. And it's a 6 mana card. It's not very good in your development either.
Right.
So yes, I'm not saying this card is bad, but if you look at it through the lens of Quadrant Theory, that actually tells you part of the reasons why it's not just a windmill slam.
Right.
Why this is worse than like a lightning axe.
Yes.
I think by a reasonable margin.
Yeah, and another one would be Stensia Masquerade. We've talked about that.
Well, that one's just very clearly like horrible in almost all these situations.
Right, but so you need, and what you can do is you can learn from that by saying, well, this is the scenario that I need it to be in, which is when I'm ahead or when I'm developing sometimes, right? But mainly it's when I'm ahead. So you need to play creatures and cards that help you get ahead early. That's how you make that kind of card good.
Yeah, and those are your top 7 LR killer apps.